So here's the thing about The Simpsons. Most of us feel like we know it, not in a casual, oh, I've seen a few episodes kind of way. I mean, we know it the way you know your childhood street or your nan's kitchen. The layout, the smell, which floorboard creaks. The Simpsons has been part of the furniture of our lives for so long that most people stopped actually looking at it somewhere around the late 90s. It became ambient, background radiation, comfort viewing, and that's understandable. 36 seasons, over 700 episodes, the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of American television. At a certain point, you stop examining things that have always been there. You just let them exist. But here's what I find genuinely fascinating, the thing that keeps me going back to this show at strange hours. The people who made it were hiding things the whole time. Not dramatic things necessarily, not conspiracy-level secrets, just details, small choices, quiet decisions made in writers' rooms and recording booths, and late-night production sessions that most viewers never noticed because there was no reason to look that closely. The show always had more going on underneath it than the surface suggested. And the more of those details you find, the more the show reveals itself to be something slightly different from what you thought it was. The theme music has a story behind it. The family's names are borrowed. The most prolific writer nobody's ever heard of operated like a ghost. There's a complete action movie hidden inside the first 4 seasons that nobody noticed for 20 years. The principal of an elementary school has a prisoner number that's also a literary clue to a plot twist 4 years away. None of this is the show showing off. It's just the show being itself, built by obsessive, overqualified, genuinely weird people who cared more than the format required. So this is that video. 2 hours or so of the stuff that's been sitting in the show the whole time, waiting. No lists, no rankings, no dramatic reveals. Just the lore, followed at whatever pace it wants to go. If you're watching this to wind down, that's exactly right. If you want to subscribe before we get started, there's a button somewhere on screen. Either way, let's just settle in. Something worth knowing about how The Simpsons came to exist is that it happened almost entirely by accident, in a very short amount of time, in a waiting room. Matt Groening was already known in the mid-1980s for a comic strip called Life in Hell, which had built up a devoted underground following. James L. Brooks, the filmmaker and producer behind broadcast news and Terms of Endearment, and at the time a powerhouse at Fox, had been watching Groening's work and invited him in to discuss creating animated shorts for the Tracy Ullman Show. Life in Hell is worth briefly understanding because it tells you something important about what Groening was before The Simpsons. It was a deliberately weird strip, black and white, featuring a rabbit named Binky, and a rotating cast of anxious, neurotic characters dealing with work, relationships, and the general low-grade misery of adult life. It was not a family-friendly comic. It ran in alternative newspapers, the kind distributed free in record shops and coffee houses and student unions, the kind that existed specifically to be read by people who found mainstream culture slightly insufficient. It had a small but devoted following of exactly the sort of person who would be described in 1985 as an alternative culture type. And it had been running since 1977. Groening had been making it for over a decade before James L. Brooks called. The meeting was meant to be about Life in Hell. Groening was going to pitch adapting those characters, the rabbits, the strip's existing world, into short animated segments. But sitting in the waiting room beforehand, he had what you might generously call a crisis of confidence, and what he'd more accurately call a panic. He didn't want to license his existing characters. He'd spent years building Life in Hell, and handing it over felt wrong. So he scrapped the plan in the waiting room and invented an entirely new family instead. He sketched out 5 characters in the time he was sitting there. A father, a mother, 2 daughters, a son. He named the father Homer, the mother Marge, the daughters Lisa and Maggie. The son he didn't name after anyone. He made that name up. Bart. An anagram of brat, though Groening has given a few slightly different accounts of the exact reasoning over the years. The anagram explanation is the one that stuck. The rest of the names, though, Homer, Marge, Lisa, Maggie, those were straight from his own family. His father was Homer Groening, his mother was Margaret, who went by Marge. His sisters were Lisa and Maggie. He confirmed this publicly in a 2012 Smithsonian interview, though he'd hinted at it for years. He said he always thought it would be sweet to have a cartoon family named after his own, and that he assumed viewers would figure it out immediately. They mostly didn't. His father, Homer, by all accounts, was delighted when he found out. His mother and sisters were apparently a little more ambivalent about having cartoon versions of themselves living permanently on television, which is fair enough, really. You'd think it was charming, and then you'd watch 12 seasons of Marge getting into increasingly elaborate domestic disasters, and you'd have complicated feelings. The surname Simpson was a different kind of choice. Groening has said he picked it partly because it sounded quintessentially American, a plain, ordinary name for a plain, ordinary family. And partly because simp as a prefix means a foolish or simple person, which felt like the right internal joke for a family patriarch who was, by design, not very clever. Simpson, the family of simps, said out loud at every dinner table in America for 35 years without most people noticing the embedded joke. And then there's Springfield. This one Groening maintained as a deliberate mystery for over 2 decades. He'd give different answers in different interviews, or deflect, or say it was intentional that the location was never specified. The show leaned into the ambiguity constantly. There are 34 Springfields across the United States, and the show made jokes about that fact on multiple occasions, teasing viewers who were trying to nail it down geographically. The actual answer, which Groening confirmed in 2012, around the same time as the family name revelation, is that Springfield was inspired by Springfield, Oregon, the town adjacent to Eugene where Groening grew up. He could see it from his childhood home, but he also said the name was chosen precisely because it was everywhere. He wanted it to feel like any American town, no specific region, no identifiable class or culture, Springfield as a concept rather than a place. What's interesting, and I keep coming back to this, is that the show's entire identity is built on that same quality. The Simpsons is both deeply specific and deliberately generic. The family is Groening's own family, but also every family. The town is his hometown, but also no town in particular. The show works because it keeps both things true at once, and that balance was built into the very first decisions he made sitting in that waiting room before the pitch had even started. He walked into that meeting with 5 characters sketched on a piece of paper, named after his own relatives, living in a town named after the view from his childhood bedroom. 20 minutes of work that became the longest-running scripted primetime show in television history. There's also the question of what didn't make it in. Groening has mentioned in various contexts that he had more family names available to use and deliberately held some back. His brother Mark, for instance, never became a Simpson family member. Whether that was a creative choice or just a matter of not needing more characters in that first sketch isn't something he's gone into in detail. But the 5 he chose, Homer, Marge, Lisa, Maggie, Bart, mapped almost exactly onto the family structure he grew up in, minus a few siblings. And the Bart/Brat anagram, if that's genuinely the origin, it's a perfect fit for the character, obviously. A mischievous, energetic, slightly chaotic 10-year-old boy whose name is a rearrangement of the word for a badly behaved child. The joke is inside the name, invisible unless you're looking. That became something of a template for how the show would hide things in general. Right there, in the open, in plain language, not requiring any special knowledge to find, just requiring someone to actually look. The Springfield location question deserves a little more time because the way Groening handled it for over 2 decades is genuinely interesting as a creative decision. He maintained deliberate ambiguity in dozens of interviews. If someone asked where Springfield was, he'd say something deflective or say it was intentionally unspecified or change the subject. The show leaned into the ambiguity comedically. There were actual visual gags built around the town's unidentifiable geography, moments where characters would reference a state and then immediately contradict themselves, environmental features that seemed to belong to different parts of the country simultaneously. This went on from 1989 to 2012. 23 years of an extremely famous show deliberately not answering a simple question. The creator of the show going on record repeatedly about other aspects of the show's creation, maintaining a single, specific non-answer about where his fictional town was supposed to be. When he finally confirmed the Oregon connection in 2012, the response was interesting. Some people felt satisfied. Some people felt slightly let down, in the way that long mysteries sometimes feel smaller when resolved than they did when open. I suspect Groening knew that would happen, which is partly why he waited so long. The mystery was more interesting than the answer in some ways. Springfield as an idea, everywhere, anywhere, the American everywhere, was a more generative fiction than Springfield as a specific Oregon reference. He gave both versions of it a long run before settling the question. The 34 Springfield's joke, which the show made in various forms over the years, is also worth noting as an example of the show being aware of its own concealment. At one point, there's a deliberate visual gag where a map of the United States lights up with all the Springfields simultaneously, a joke about the very impossibility of locating the show's setting. The show didn't just maintain the mystery, it actively mocked the idea of resolving it, pointed at its own evasiveness, and made that evasiveness part of the comedy. It's the same quality that shows up in the Krusty as Homer design in the McBain film in the Skinner number. The show hiding something and then quietly acknowledging that it's hiding something, trusting the audience to either catch it or be fine without catching it. I don't know what the lesson is there exactly, but I find it a genuinely comforting thought late at night, that something enormous can come from something very small and very personal and done quickly out of mild panic. The Simpsons theme is one of the most recognizable pieces of television music ever written. That much is just a fact of the world at this point. You could hum it to almost anyone alive today in almost any country and they'd know it. It's entered that rare category of cultural objects that feel like they've always existed, that you can't imagine the world without. Like a good nursery rhyme or a classic logo. It sits in the mind like it was always there. It was written on a single car ride home from a meeting. Danny Elfman Potikaning, who by 1989 had already built a substantial career through his band Oingo Boingo and was beginning his work in film scoring, including his collaborations with Tim Burton, met with Matt Groening about the new show. The brief was minimal. They talked about what the show was, what kind of feeling the theme should have. And then Elfman got in his car and drove home. By the time he arrived, he had the tune. He recorded a demo that same evening in his home studio. He sang the 3 opening notes of the theme himself, with 2 friends providing the harmonies. The entire thing, conception, travel, recording, happened within a single day. He's described it in interviews as one of the least effortful compositions he's ever done. It arrived, he captured it, and it was more or less right immediately. Groening has said it was one of the most perfect things anyone contributed to the show. And I think that tracks. There's something about that theme that's genuinely unusual. It's both chaotic and warm, slightly menacing and somehow welcoming. It sounds like a family that's a bit much, which is exactly the right tone. What I find interesting sitting alongside that story is the parallel with the man who actually scored the show for most of its run. Alf Clausen took over as the primary composer in season 2 and held that role for 27 years, through nearly 600 episodes. He conducted a live 35-piece orchestra for the show's underscore. Actual musicians in a room playing in real time for a cartoon. That level of production is almost unheard of for animation. Most animated shows use synthesizers and digital composition by the 1990s. Clausen brought an orchestra, he won 2 Emmy Awards for original songs, was nominated for 21 more. He won 5 Annie Awards. He worked on the show from 1990 to 2017, and then in 2017, Fox fired him as part of a cost-cutting measure. 27 years, nearly 600 episodes, let go as a budget line. He later filed a lawsuit. The case was eventually settled. Clausen died in May 2025 at 84. He never returned to the show. The contrast between those 2 stories sits with me whenever I think about the music. Danny Elfman in a car, effortlessly producing one of the most iconic television themes in history in a day. Alf Clausen, years of meticulous orchestral work, and then a letter. both of them essential, neither story quite canceling out the other. And the orchestral approach Clausen took is worth pausing on, because it shaped the emotional register of the show in ways that aren't always visible. By the 1990s, most animated television was using digital instruments and small ensembles. The cost of live orchestral recording is substantial, and the justification for it in a half-hour comedy cartoon is almost entirely aesthetic. Someone decided the show should sound like it was being taken seriously at the level of scoring, in a way that very few cartoons attempted. Clausen's approach was to serve the comedy without underlining it. Music that comments on jokes tends to make them smaller. Music that supports the emotional reality of a scene lets the comedy land on its own. The Simpsons underscore, at its best, did the second thing. It treated Homer's disasters and Bart's schemes and Lisa's disappointments as things with genuine emotional weight, which paradoxically made them funnier. There are also a remarkable number of guest versions of the theme embedded across the show's run. Yo La Tengo's psychedelic rock arrangement, Los Lobos' Chicano rock version, a post-rock version by Sigur Rós that's slightly haunting, in a way that shouldn't work for a comedy show and somehow does. Sonic Youth played a noise rock version at the end of Homer Palooza in Season 7, which Groening has described as among his favorites. Billie Eilish recorded a version for a Disney Plus short film in more recent years. Each of these is a different artist finding what lives inside Elfman's 1989 melody. The same tune, opened differently each time. One more detail about the theme worth mentioning. The show has kept Elfman's underlying composition untouched for 35 plus years. It's been arranged differently at different points, but the melody has never been replaced. The HD opening introduced in Season 20 brought an entirely new visual sequence while keeping the same music. That's unusual. Shows update their themes. The Simpsons just kept Elfman's car ride composition in the same key with the same rhythm for over 3 decades. There's something quietly stubborn about that, like the show decided very early that this was the sound of Springfield, and there was no reason to pretend otherwise. It's a tune written in 20 minutes that has now played at the start of every episode since 1989. That's not a coincidence, it's a very good tune. Something that makes the Elfman story even more interesting is where he was coming from. By 1989, when he wrote the theme, Elfman was living a double life that was genuinely unusual for someone of his profile. He was the frontman of Oingo Boingo, a Los Angeles new wave band he'd been leading since 1976, a group known for its eclectic, genre-crossing sound that blended ska, punk, and experimental pop in ways that didn't quite fit any existing category. He was also, by 1989, one of the most sought-after film composers in Hollywood. His film scoring career had started 4 years earlier with Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985. Tim Burton's first feature, for which Elfman wrote a score so zany and precise that it established his film persona almost immediately. Then Beetlejuice in 1988. Then, the same year he wrote the Simpsons theme, Batman, a score so influential that it won him a Grammy and essentially defined the sonic language of the superhero blockbuster for the following decade. The Simpsons theme and the Batman score are from the same year. One of them became the sound of the most relentless, urgent, gothic action cinema of its era. The other became the sound of a cartoon family in a fictional American town. Both written by the same person in the same 12-month window, apparently with the same ease of access to exactly the right melody for each. What makes the theme's survival even more pointed, given all of that, is that Elfman himself reportedly considers the Simpsons theme the single most heard piece of music he's ever written. Not the Batman score, not anything from The Nightmare Before Christmas. The 35-second cartoon tune he wrote in a car. Right. There's a version of The Simpsons that most people have never heard of. Not a different show, the same one, same characters, same Springfield. But a version that exists in the mind of the person who wrote more of it than anyone else in history. and who spent nearly 2 decades after leaving making sure almost nobody could find him. John Swartzwelder wrote 59 episodes of The Simpsons. That number is not a typo. 59 full episodes with contributions to several others. The next most prolific writer on the show has roughly half that count. By the time Swartzwelder left in 2003, he had written more Simpsons than any other individual human being had, or likely will. And until 2021, he had given exactly 0 interviews, not one. For over 30 years, one of the most consequential comedy writers in television history simply did not speak to the press. His colleague George Meyer, himself one of the great unsung architects of the show, describes Swartzwelder as one of the funniest people he'd ever encountered. The critic and Simpsons historian Chris Turner described his specialty as conjuring characters from a strange old America. Banjo-playing hobos, cigarette-smoking ventriloquist dummies, 19th century baseball players, rat-tailed carnival children, pantsless singing old-timers. There's a specific flavor to a Swartzwelder episode that you can often identify before the writer's credit appears. A baroque, slightly sinister eccentricity underneath the jokes. Like the show briefly went somewhere further west and further back in time. Sam Simon, who we'll talk about properly in a moment, recruited Swartzwelder in 1988 by reading a humor magazine called Army Man, a tiny self-published thing that had almost no circulation but was circulating among people who found this kind of writing. Simon tracked down Swartzwelder and George Meyer through it. Both of them became foundational to the show's voice. Now, the smoking booth story. This is the one that Swartzwelder people tend to share first because it perfectly captures something about how he operated. He was a heavy smoker who wrote almost exclusively at a specific diner booth, sitting there with coffee, cigarettes, and whatever he was working on. It was his process. The booth was where the work happened. In 1994, California passed an indoor smoking ban. Restaurants, offices, public buildings, all of it now smoke-free. The rest of the Simpsons writing staff adjusted. They stopped smoking in the writer's room, or stepped outside, or gave up entirely. Swartzwelder took a different approach. He found the diner where he'd been working, negotiated with the owner, and bought the booth. He then had it installed in his house. He continued writing in the booth. He just did it at home now, where California had no jurisdiction over what he put in an ashtray. This is not a rumor. Matt Groening confirmed it publicly, describing Swartzwelder as writing in a booth from a coffee shop that he bought and installed in his house, drinking copious amounts of coffee and smoking endless cigarettes. The image is perfect. A man who, when society changed around his process, simply bought the part of society he needed and moved it indoors. By season 6, around the time of the smoking arrangement, the show granted Swartzwelder a dispensation that no other writer received. He was officially excused from attending the writer's room rewrite sessions. Every other writer participated in the room rewrites. That's how television comedy works, the collaborative process of sharpening and adjusting everyone's drafts together. Swartzwelder would send his scripts in, other writers would revise them as needed, and the process happened without him in the room. His scripts reportedly needed less rewriting than almost anyone else's. About 50% of a Swartzwelder draft typically survived to screen, which by Simpsons standards was a remarkably high retention rate. He left the show in 2003, and then he became something of a ghost. No interviews, no public profile, no social media, no panels, no podcast appearances. None of the things that writers of his stature usually end up doing. He started writing self-published absurdist novels, over a dozen of them, about a detective named Frank Burley. The books are difficult to find and warmly received by the people who seek them out. Some of his specific episodes are worth naming because they're among the most celebrated pieces of television the show has ever produced. Homer at the Bat, Season 3, with the famous baseball episode featuring a roster of celebrity guests, each one given a comedic fate that landed precisely. Marge versus the Monorail, Season 4, which became one of the most quoted episodes in the show's history. the traveling salesman, the musical sequence, the catastrophic infrastructure decision made at town meeting with almost no deliberation. Cape Fear, Season 5, the Sideshow Bob episode in which he steps on a rake, repeatedly in an extended sequence that shouldn't be funny for as long as it is and remains funny for longer than seems possible. Homer the Great, Season 6. Homie the Clown, Season 6, which returns to the crusty as Homer dynamic in interesting ways. I should correct myself here since we're being precise. Marge vs. the Monorail was actually written by Conan O'Brien, and Cape Fiere was John Vitti's. Both are sometimes grouped mentally with Swartzwelder's work because they share the same era and sensibility, and in a writer's room where everyone is rewriting everyone else's drafts constantly, the lines blur. But Swartzwelder's actual credits include Homer at the Bat, Homer the Great, Homie the Clown, You Only Move Twice, the Hank Scorpio episode, which I'd argue is one of the show's 10 best, and Homer's Enemy, which is the Frank Grimes episode, and which may be the most philosophically interesting episode the show ever made. The Homer at the Bat details are worth dwelling on for a moment because they illustrate the sensibility so well. The premise is that Mr. Burns hires 9 professional baseball players to guarantee his power plant wins its softball championship. The comedy comes from the elaborate specific fates that befall each player before the game. Steve Sachs is arrested by Springfield police and charged with every unsolved murder in New York City. Mike Scioscia gets radiation poisoning from actually working at the nuclear plant. He's the only player who takes his job assignment seriously. Ken Griffey Jr. develops gigantism from taking too much of a nerve tonic Burns distributes to the team. Jose Canseco becomes preoccupied rescuing a family's belongings from a burning house. Wade Boggs is knocked unconscious by Barney at Moe's Tavern during an argument about whether Pitt the Elder or Lord Palmerston was the better British Prime Minister. Ozzie Smith disappears into the Springfield mystery spot and is never retrieved. Roger Clemens is hypnotized into believing he is a chicken. Don Mattingly is suspended for refusing to shave his sideburns, which Don Mattingly does not have. The joke is that Burns is so demanding that he has invented a grooming infraction specifically to discipline someone he doesn't like. Each fate is calibrated to something specific about that player's actual public persona or circumstances at the time. Steve Sachs had recently been questioned by police in New York. Mattingly had a real-world dispute with the Yankees about his haircut. The show wasn't just assigning random fates, it was doing homework. Frank Grimes is a man who has worked hard his entire life, survived a difficult childhood, and achieved modest results through genuine effort. He arrives at the nuclear plant and encounters Homer, who has achieved considerably more through no effort at all, and he cannot process it. The episode is the show looking directly at its own central absurdity. Homer's life is objectively impossible. And instead of winking at it or defending it, letting a character see it clearly and be destroyed by the sight, Swartzwelder described his feelings about Grimes simply. Grimey was asking for it the whole episode. He didn't approve of our Homer. Which is also probably the right answer. The rake sequence from Cape Fear is probably the clearest example of what Swartzwelder could do that other writers couldn't quite replicate. It's a joke that extends past the point of comfort. Sideshow Bob, nemesis, dramatically threatening villain. Stepping on a rake, falling over, stepping on another rake, falling over again, and again, and again, 7 or 8 times, possibly more. The exact count varies depending on who you ask and whether you're counting the rakes by the road versus the rakes at the circus. It goes far beyond what the joke technically needs. And then it continues going past the point where you're laughing at the rake, to the point where you're laughing at the show's commitment to the rake, to the point where you're laughing at yourself for still being surprised by it. The joke outstays its welcome to the point where the overstaying is the joke. That's a specific comic sensibility, and it runs through a lot of his work. The willingness to go further than the joke technically requires, to commit past the point of reasonable return, to trust that the audience can follow you somewhere uncomfortable and still be laughing when you arrive. In 2021, he said one thing in that New Yorker interview that I've thought about a lot, about the approach to a first draft: get it wrong fast, then fix it slow. Write a terrible first draft as quickly as possible to get the shape of the thing down without caring about quality, and then revise carefully afterward. It sounds obvious when stated plainly. Most advice about writing does. But the way he described it, as though this were a hard-won technical insight rather than a general principle, made it feel like something he had genuinely discovered by writing 59 episodes of one of the most scrutinized television comedies in history. There's something about Swartzwelder that the show has never quite repeated. 59 episodes worth of something that was genuinely his and nobody else's. Written in a diner booth he eventually relocated to his living room, by a man who then disappeared for 20 years and only surfaced once, briefly, to explain his methods without ceremony. He gave the show its comedic DNA in a very large part. And then he took it back and went home. One last detail about Swartzwelder that I find quietly wonderful. For a period, a significant number of Simpsons fans genuinely debated whether he existed. The theory, which circulated seriously on DVD commentary discussions and fan forums, was that John Swartzwelder was a pseudonym, a fake name the writing staff used for episodes they didn't want to take individual credit for, or for heavily collaborative scripts where no single writer could fairly claim authorship. The theory was aided by the fact that there was essentially one photograph of him online. He never appeared in interviews, and he declined every request to contribute to the DVD commentaries. Al Jean mentioned the fan theory on one of the audio commentaries and treated it as somewhat understandable given the circumstances. Matt Selman, the current showrunner, described a Swartzweldian joke as something uniquely dumb and smart at the same time, which is as good a description of a specific comic register as I've ever heard. It's a real person. He's just not interested in being findable. Ask most people who created The Simpsons and they'll say Matt Groening, which is accurate in the most literal sense. Groening conceived the characters, gave them their names, drew the first sketches. The copyright is his. The merchandising credit is his. His face is the one in the documentaries. But if you talk to the people who were actually in the room when the show was being built, the writers, the directors, the production staff of those first seasons, you get a slightly different picture. The person most responsible for the show working as a comedy, for it having the specific timing and structure and observational precision that made it extraordinary, was the third name in the credits. The one most people tend to skip over on the way to Groening's, Sam Simon. Simon came aboard as a developer and creative supervisor before the show's first season. He had already worked as a writer and producer on Taxi and Cheers, two of the best American sitcoms of their era. And he brought that experience to The Simpsons at the precise moment it needed it. What Groening had were characters and a sensibility. What Simon had was architecture. He knew how a comedy room should function, how to assemble a writing staff, how to structure a story, how to get a joke from an idea to a finished scene without losing whatever made it funny in the first place. He built the first writer's room. He hired George Meyer, John Swartzwelder, John Vitti, Jay Kogan, Wallace Wolodarski, people who between them shaped the voice of the classic era more than any other contributors. He found Swartzwelder through Army Man. He found Meyer through similar underground circles. He was, by all accounts, extremely good at recognizing what kind of talent the show needed and going to find it. His creative influence on the early seasons is hard to overstate and easy to overlook, partly because he left the show under difficult circumstances after season 4. The relationship with Groening and James L. Brooks deteriorated. There were creative and personal conflicts. By the end of season 4, he was gone, and by most accounts, the split was not pleasant. But here's the strange thing. When Simon left, he retained his executive producer credit. His name continues to appear at the top of every episode of The Simpsons ever broadcast. And crucially, he retained his profit participation deal, a share of the show's revenue in perpetuity. Given what The Simpsons became financially, one of the most valuable intellectual properties in television history, generating money across decades of syndication, merchandise, DVD sales, streaming rights, theme parks. That deal paid out on a scale that's difficult to fully comprehend. Simon used that money in a way that I think is genuinely worth knowing about. He became one of the most significant animal rights philanthropists in America. He funded shelters, anti-cruelty campaigns, large-scale veterinary programs for animals that couldn't otherwise access care. He supported veterans' causes, hunger programs, a range of charitable work that had nothing to do with television and everything to do with the kind of person he apparently was underneath the industry persona. In 2012, he was diagnosed with terminal colorectal cancer. His doctors told him he had a few months to live. He lived for 3 more years, dying in March 2015. He spent much of that time continuing his charitable work, giving away the money the show had made him on causes he'd chosen at his own pace. The show's response to his death was muted in the way institutional responses to difficult pardons often are. A brief acknowledgement. His credit still rolls on every episode. His name is still there in the opening every week, as it has been since 1989. There's a version of The Simpsons conversation that happens a lot in fan circles. Groening versus Simon, who really built the show, who deserves more credit. And I think the honest answer is that both versions of the question are a bit too simple. Groening had the characters and the vision and the aesthetic. Simon had the craft and the infrastructure and the ability to turn a vision into a functioning comedy machine. Neither of them built the show without the other. The version that exists is the one that needed both. But Simon's half of that equation is the half that tends to disappear into the background, which is why I think it's worth sitting with for a moment. A lot of what we think of as The Simpsons voice, the architecture, the comic precision, the staff he assembled, came from him. It's all still there in every episode 3 decades after he left. You just have to know to look for the invisible scaffolding. What I find particularly illuminating about his pre-Simpsons career is how specifically it contextualizes what he contributed. Taxi and Cheers were 2 of the most carefully constructed American sitcoms of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Both operated on the principle that character comedy works best when the characters are specific enough to surprise you, when you know them so well that you can predict how they'd react, and then they respond in the way that's true to who they are rather than what the plot needs. That's a harder thing to sustain than it sounds. It requires a writer's room that understands the difference between a character doing what's convenient and a character doing what's inevitable given who they are. Simon also came into the project with something else valuable. He'd written for Saturday Night Live before joining The Simpsons, as had Swartzwelder and George Meyer. That SNL pipeline in the mid-1980s produced a specific kind of trained comedy writer, people who had learned to write very quickly under enormous pressure, who knew how to land a joke in under 30 seconds, who understood that a sketch had to establish, escalate, and pay off within a format that didn't forgive meandering. The early Simpsons writing room contained a disproportionate number of people with that training, and it shows in the pacing of the early seasons. The joke density, the efficiency of setups, the speed at which scenes move from premise to resolution without lingering. Simon brought that discipline to The Simpsons, and the early seasons reflect it. Homer in seasons 1 through 4 is often surprising in ways that later Homer isn't, because the writing was operating within a more precise understanding of who he specifically was, rather than what he could generically do for a plot. The same with Marge, with Bart, with Lisa. The characters in those seasons feel inhabited rather than operated. His credit still rolls at the top of every episode. It has since 1989, and it will for as long as the show broadcasts. That's not nothing. Somewhere in the first 4 seasons of The Simpsons, there's a complete action film. It has a plot, a villain, a revenge arc, a love interest, a resolution. It runs about 4 minutes in total. It was watched by millions of people across roughly a 5-year window, and almost nobody noticed it was there. The film is called McBain, or at least it would be if it existed as a single thing. It doesn't. It exists in pieces distributed across 5 separate episodes, spaced months and sometimes over a year apart, inserted as brief cutaway gags. The family watching television, a couple of minutes of fictional film content, then back to the main plot. Each clip appears to be self-contained, a parody of action movies, background noise, filler. Rainier Wolfcastle, the show's fictional Austrian action star, plays McBain across all of them. He first appears in Season 2, and the clips continue through Season 4. The individual scenes are funny as standalone parodies. They nail the specific absurdity of late 80s and early 90s action movies. The cold opening where the hero's partner gets killed, the corrupt senator, the conversation where the captain tells him he's off the case, the rogue mission that goes wrong in the right ways. Classic beats, well observed, quick, economical, effective. It wasn't until 2011, roughly 20 years after the first clip aired, that a fan assembled all 5 clips in episode order, played them sequentially, and the structure became visible. McBain investigates a corrupt senator, loses his partner to an assassination, is told to drop the case by his superiors, refuses, goes rogue, pursues the villain independently, defeats him, and gets the girl. Beginning, middle, end. A fully functional narrative distributed across 5 episodes, 4 seasons, assembled from what had looked like incidental comedy cutaways. The clips are drawn from Season 2, Episode 13, Season 2, Episode 21, Season 3, Episode 2, Season 4, Episode 2, and Season 4, Episode 22. They were never intended to air consecutively. In their original context, they're separated by months. Nothing in any individual episode draws attention to any of the others. A viewer watching Season 3, Episode 2 had no reason to recall a cutaway from Season 2, Episode 21 8 months earlier. Whether this was deliberately planned by the writing staff, a fully intentional hidden film laid in across 4 seasons, or whether it evolved organically with different writers picking up the Wolfcastle character and collectively, perhaps half-consciously, building toward a coherent narrative, has never been definitively confirmed. The writers haven't given a clear answer either way. The prevailing assumption among people who've thought about it is that it was intentional because the narrative coherence is too clean to be coincidence. A partner death, an investigation, a corrupt authority, a rogue mission, a resolution. Those aren't random action beats that happen to line up. Someone was tracking the story. What I like about this one as a hidden detail is that it's not hidden in the way most hidden things in the show are hidden. It's not in the background of a frame, not encoded in a number, not buried in a piece of dialogue you'd only catch if you were reading subtitles. It was literally on television, broadcast to millions of people at full volume in plain sight. It was just distributed across time in a way that prevented anyone from seeing it as a whole. The film was always there. It just required a specific kind of attention to reassemble. There's something almost interesting about the way it was discovered too. Not by anyone particularly academic or professional, by a fan in 2011 who decided to pull all the clips and put them in order, probably at a strange hour, probably without expecting to find anything more than a fun compilation, and instead found a complete film. The discovery going viral in 2011 was itself an interesting cultural moment. The era of YouTube had created the specific infrastructure required for this kind of find to propagate. Someone assembled the clips, uploaded the result, and within days, people who had watched those individual episodes dozens of times over 20 years were having the experience of seeing something familiar become something different. The clips they'd absorbed as background didn't change. The structure they revealed, once visible, couldn't be unseen. That's a specific and slightly strange experience, not learning something new exactly, but having something you already knew rearranged into a shape you hadn't registered. The information was always there. The pattern just needed someone to connect the instances. The Wolfcastle character himself, for what it's worth, is a precise and affectionate send-up of Arnold Schwarzenegger. The accent, the physique, the blunt instrument charm, the total earnestness about extremely silly material. He kept appearing in the show long past season 4 in various contexts, but the McBain narrative itself was complete by then. 4 seasons, 5 clips, 1 movie that nobody watched as a movie for 2 decades. I find myself thinking that the show basically trusted that someone would eventually notice. Not as a marketing strategy, not as a planted Easter egg designed for a viral moment, just as the natural result of making something carefully enough for long enough. Eventually, careful attention finds what careful craft left. And there's something worth noting about the Wolfcastle character more broadly, since he didn't disappear after the McBain arc concluded. He kept appearing in the show for years afterward. At Moe's, at the nuclear plant, in various Springfield social contexts, always as this gentle joke about Austrian muscle-bound celebrity culture, always slightly more self-aware than the action movies he's parodying. There's an episode in season 6 where Bart becomes his personal assistant briefly, and there's an episode in season 8 where his family life is glimpsed in ways that make him genuinely sympathetic. The show built a real character around what started as a parody premise, which is something it did regularly. Wolfcastle has backstory, relationships, an Austrian wife, children, professional insecurities. He's a full person who also happens to be the unwitting star of a secret 4-minute film. The Schwarzenegger parallel is worth sitting with for a moment too, because the timing is very specific. Wolfcastle was introduced in season 2, which aired in 1990 and 1991. Schwarzenegger was at or near the peak of his film career at exactly that point. Total Recall came out in 1990. Terminator 2 in 1991. The parody was landing on a target at maximum cultural saturation. The show was making fun of something enormous while it was enormous, which is both a harder and a more satisfying comedic achievement than retrospective parody. The McBain film's narrative beats, the doom partner, the corrupt politician, the maverick cop going off script to get justice, are also a quite precise inventory of the actual conventions of that specific era of action cinema. Someone on the writing staff had watched enough of those films to construct a miniature one from memory, hidden across 4 seasons, perfectly paced, structurally complete. That's not just a joke, that's a love letter to a genre built by someone who cared enough to do it properly. 4 seasons, 5 clips, 1 movie that nobody watched as a movie for 2 decades. There's a visual clue sitting in the design of 2 main Simpsons characters that has been visible in every episode both of them appear in, right from the beginning, and most viewers have walked right past it every time, not because it's hidden, because it's hiding in full view, which is a different thing entirely. Look at Krusty the Clown without the makeup. Or rather, look at what he actually looks like under the clown persona. The basic facial structure, the eyes, the build, the silhouette. Now look at Homer Simpson from the same angle. Remove Krusty's oversized shoes, the green hair, the makeup, the costume. What you're left with is functionally Homer. Same head shape, same proportions, same face. Krusty the Clown is Homer Simpson in full clown kit, and that has been true since 1989. This isn't a coincidence or a lazy animation shortcut. It's the remaining physical evidence of a concept that was outlined in the show's development and then shelved before it could be executed. The original plan, as Groening has confirmed in various interviews over the years, was that Krusty the Clown was Homer. Not metaphorically, not as a fan theory, literally. Homer Simpson had a secret second life as a local children's television entertainer. He put on the makeup and the costume and went to work as Krusty, and his family had no idea. The core joke, and there's real depth in it if you think about it, was that Bart worships Krusty and dismisses his father. Bart thinks his dad is a nobody and Krusty is a hero. And the punchline that the show was building toward was that they're the same person. The person Bart idolizes is the person Bart ignores. He's been looking at his hero every day and seeing a failure. The concept was developed and then put aside, reportedly because the execution felt too complicated for the format. A reveal like that would have required a whole episode, probably more than one, and it would have permanently changed the dynamic between Bart and Homer in ways the show wasn't ready for. So the story was dropped, but the visual clue wasn't. Whoever designed Krusty used Homer's face as the foundation, and nobody changed it. The design remained. The structural similarity stayed in the show even after the narrative that explained it was removed, which means that for 36 years, in every episode Krusty has appeared in, the evidence of a story the show never told has been sitting right there, visible to anyone who looked closely enough at the faces. The show acknowledged this directly in Season 6, Episode 12, Homer versus Patty and Selma, where Homer briefly goes undercover as a clown for an unrelated reason and is immediately convincing enough to confuse people. And in Season 6, Episode 15, Homer the Great, when Homer briefly infiltrates Krusty's world, the visual similarity is played for a quick joke. He barely needs a costume. Those gags only work because of the underlying design logic. The show was winking at something it had decided not to say out loud, which is a very Simpsons thing to do. There's also a Season 3 episode called Like Father, Like Clown, the show's first Krusty-focused backstory episode, where Krusty's full name is revealed as Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerikam Krustofsky, and the plot concerns his estrangement from his father, a respected rabbi who disapproved of his son choosing a life in comedy. The episode is partly a parody of The Jazz Singer, and it's one of the show's early demonstrations that secondary characters deserved real backstory rather than just recurring joke roles. The Krusty that emerges from it, a man who has been performing for his entire life partly to compensate for something his father withheld, sits in interesting relation to the original dropped concept. If Krusty had been Homer all along, that backstory would have been Homer's backstory. A man estranged from his father's expectations who invented a persona to keep the world at arm's length. That's not a stretch from what Homer actually is, it's just said out loud in a different register. The show dropped the literal version and kept the emotional logic anyway, distributed across a different character. There's a companion detail that lives alongside this one, quiet and easy to miss. God and Jesus are the only two characters in The Simpsons drawn with 5 fingers on each hand. Every other character, every human, every alien, every one-off guest has 4. The show has maintained this distinction consistently for decades. Most casual viewers have never noticed because you're not counting fingers while watching a cartoon. But it's there, in every frame these characters appear in, a tiny visual grammar that marks divinity as structurally different from everyone else. 4 fingers for mortals, 5 for the divine, a rule the animators follow every time, quietly, for 35 years in the background of jokes. Both details, the Krusty as Homer design and the finger distinction, are the show making a decision and then maintaining it with complete consistency, indefinitely without announcement. Not because anyone was ever expected to notice, just because it was the right decision, and once the right decision is made, you keep it. There's a version of the Krusty Homer concept that I think is actually more affecting than the literal Homer as Krusty reveal would have been. And it's the version the show accidentally preserved by abandoning the plot. In the version we have, it's where Krusty and Homer are just visually identical but canonically separate. The parallel becomes thematic rather than literal. Homer is a man whose children don't quite see him. Bart worships a clown who looks like his father but isn't. The gap between them is performance. Homer's Homer without the makeup, without the costume, without the showbiz framework that makes a man seem worth admiring. The show we have asks quietly whether the person Bart would love, if he could just see past the ordinary, is the person already sitting in the armchair. That question isn't asked directly. The show doesn't frame it. It's in the character design, quietly, episode after episode. And I wonder sometimes whether the concept being dropped actually made it more powerful than the reveal would have been. A stated truth is always smaller than a suggested one. Since we're talking about hidden design choices, here's one that's easy to notice once you know it and essentially invisible until then. Look at any crowd scene in Springfield, any large gathering of townspeople. The background characters, the extras, the faces in the mass. They're mostly reused designs, the same faces appear in different contexts, slightly shuffled. This is a production reality of animated television, and the Simpsons staff embraced it rather than hiding it, eventually making recurring background characters, Hans Moleman, blue-haired lawyer, Raphael the sarcastic clerk, into genuine running jokes. The limitation became the comedy. Hans Moleman in particular deserves a mention here because he's the show's clearest example of a background character elevated by sheer frequency of suffering. A small, elderly man with terrible vision who appears in the background of various Springfield disasters, routinely injured or inconvenienced. Never the focus, but always present. He has a name, he has a voice, he has a specific character. Gentle, resigned, perpetually unfortunate. He was originally a one-off gag and became, over the course of hundreds of episodes, one of the show's most beloved supporting figures. Entirely because the writers kept putting him in the background of scenes and finding reasons for something to go wrong for him. Here's a detail that requires a bit of setup, but I promise it's worth it. In Season 5, Episode 1, Homer's Barbershop Quartet, which first aired in September 1993, Principal Seymour Skinner is briefly asked about his experiences as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. In passing as Trashin Ali in the middle of a much larger plot about Homer's forgotten pop music career. He mentions his POW identification number. The number is 24601. 24601 is famously the prisoner number of Jean Valjean in Victor Hugo's Les Misérables. Valjean is a man who, after his release from prison, builds an entirely new life for himself under an assumed identity, becoming a respected mayor, a trusted member of society, a man of good standing, while concealing who he really is and living in constant fear of exposure. 4 years after that Season 5 number was spoken on screen, in Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper, the show revealed that Seymour Skinner, the uptight, buttoned-up war veteran principal of Springfield Elementary, who had been a recurring character since the show's first episode, was not actually Seymour Skinner. His real name was Armin Tamzarian, a drifter and petty criminal who had assumed the identity of a missing soldier, built a new life, earned a reputation, and lived in fear of the day someone from his past would show up and take the whole thing apart. Which is to say, in Season 5, the writers hid the thematic key to a Season 9 plot twist inside a throwaway line of dialogue. Whether this was a deliberate plant, the specific number chosen because it encoded the Valjean comparison, knowing the story was coming, or whether a later writer picked up the detail and ran with it, has never been fully confirmed. The structural fit is too elegant to feel accidental. The number is too specific. Valjean's story is too precisely the story that the Principal and the Pauper would eventually tell. I should mention that The Principal and the Pauper is one of the most controversial episodes in the show's history. A significant number of fans genuinely dislike it, not for being a bad episode exactly, but for what it does to continuity. 8 years of established Skinner backstory, the war stories, the mother dynamic, the whole careful character architecture built through dozens of episodes. All of it retroactively shifted by a single revelation. The episode ends with the townspeople literally agreeing in a formal ceremony to never speak of this again, and Skinner returning to his normal life as if nothing happened, which is, when you think about it, the show being very self-aware about what it just did. The Principal and the Pauper marked the beginning of what became known as the Mike Scully era of the show. Scully took over as showrunner in Season 9. and the episode is often cited as the first significant sign that the show was becoming more willing to prioritize a good concept over established continuity. That's a contested reading. Some people think the episode is genuinely clever. Some think it's the moment the show started losing its grip on what it had built. Both things can be true at once. The episode is both clever and careless. The Valjean number is genuinely elegant long-term storytelling. The execution of the reveal was controversial enough that the show itself felt the need to include a "let's never speak of this again" button. The specific mechanism of the controversy is interesting from a writing perspective. Continuity retcons in television tend to fail when they erase something the audience loved rather than adding to it. The principal in The Pauper didn't add a layer to Skinner. It replaced one. The war veteran backstory, the difficult relationship with his mother, the specific history of a man who survived something terrible and found purpose through order. All of that was present in earlier seasons, built carefully and distinctly. The Tamzarian reveal didn't add a secret dimension to that story. It said the story was borrowed rather than real, which felt like a different thing entirely. The audience had invested in a particular Skinner, and the episode asked them to revise that investment retroactively. The Valjean parallel was right, though. Whatever you think of the execution, the underlying concept is coherent. A man who stole an identity and built a life around it, living in quiet terror of the day someone would come to reclaim what he borrowed. That's dramatically sound. Valjean's story endures because the question at its center is genuinely interesting. Is the person you become more real than the person you were? Armin Tamzarian became Seymour Skinner so completely for so long that Springfield had no meaningful relationship with the real Skinner when he appeared. The borrowed identity was more real to everyone who knew it than the original. The show somewhat fumbled that idea in the episode itself, but the number in season 5 suggests someone had it in mind well before the episode was written. There's one more thread connected to this section that's worth following briefly. The principal and the pauper is often discussed as the beginning of the end of something in the show, the moment when continuity became expendable if the concept was good enough. But the show's relationship with its own history has always been more complicated than the simple classic era good, later era bad reading suggests. The season 12 episode HOMR, where Homer discovers a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood that explains his diminished intelligence, is a good example of a later era episode that handled continuity with genuine care. The episode used an absurdist premise to explain something real about the character's arc across the show's run. Homer's increasing stupidity across the seasons was a real phenomenon observed by viewers, and the episode addressed it directly rather than ignoring it. That's a different relationship with continuity than the Tamzarian episode. Not erasure, but acknowledgement. The show looking at itself clearly and writing something honest about what it saw. Both approaches are present across the run. The show has always been capable of both. What I keep returning to, though, is that number. Season 5, 1993. A passing reference in an episode mostly about something else. 24,601. The prisoner of an identity he didn't quite belong to, who built a life around the question of whether the life you construct is as real as the one you were born into. The clue was sitting there in the dialogue for 4 years before the story it belonged to was told. That's a specific kind of patience, or a specific kind of luck. Either way, someone knew what that number meant. Television comedy writing is not, generally speaking, a profession that attracts people with advanced degrees in applied mathematics. It attracts clever people, observant people, people with good timing and a facility for dialogue and an instinct for what's funny. It does not typically attract people who have published research in computational complexity theory, or who hold doctorates in applied mathematics, or who wrote their undergraduate thesis on the mathematical properties of knot theory. The Simpsons writing room, particularly in the classic era, attracted exactly these people. And the evidence is embedded in the show in ways that most viewers walk right past, in backgrounds and on chalkboards and in throwaway lines, for over 3 decades. Al Jean, one of the showrunners for seasons 3 and 4, and then again from season 13 to the present, studied mathematics at Harvard. Mike Rice, his co-showrunner, also Harvard. Conan O'Brien, who wrote for the show in seasons 3 and 4 before leaving for late-night television, Harvard again. David X. Cohen, he who went on to co-create Futurama with Groening, studied physics at Harvard as an undergraduate, and then took a master's degree in computer science at Berkeley. Ken Keeler holds a PhD in applied mathematics from Harvard. The specific subject of his doctoral thesis, homotopy theory, which concerns the deformation of mathematical spaces. These are not people who are incidentally good at maths. These are people who had spent years doing rigorous academic mathematics before they wrote a single episode of a cartoon. And they hid the evidence of that throughout the show. The most famous single example is in season 10, episode 2, The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace, which first aired in September 1998. In the episode, Homer becomes obsessed with Thomas Edison and attempts to become an inventor. In one scene, he writes a series of equations on a blackboard. The third equation, if you pause and examine it, appears to be a disproof of Fermat's last theorem, a proof that there are no integer solutions to the equation a to the power of n plus b to the power of n equals c to the power of n for values of n greater than 2. This theorem had been an unsolved problem in mathematics for over 350 years and had only been formally proven by Andrew Wiles in 1995, 3 years before this episode. Homer's blackboard equation appears at first glance to work. Plug the numbers into a calculator and the left side appears to equal the right side. David X. Cohen, who wrote the equation specifically for this scene, designed it as an approximation, a near miss that holds numerically because calculators round to a limited number of decimal places, but which breaks down at higher precision. It's not actually a disproof of Fermat's last theorem, it's a joke that only fully lands if you're working in enough decimal places to see where it fails. That's a very specific level of effort to put into a background gag in a cartoon. Cohen has confirmed he put it there deliberately. It's one of several similar moments across the show's run where genuine mathematical content is embedded in the background for no practical audience benefit whatsoever. Just because the writers could and because it amused them. There are others. A correct proof of a non-trivial theorem visible on a chalkboard in Bart the Genius, Season 1, Episode 2, topology jokes in several Treehouse of Horror segments that are mathematically accurate, a reference to P versus NP in one of the great unsolved problems in computer science, buried in a single line of Frink dialogue in a Season 10 episode. None of these are pointed out. None are explained. They exist for whoever happens to be in the right position to notice. Ken Keeler, the mathematician with the homotopy theory doctorate, wrote what became known as the Futurama theorem for an episode of that show years later. An actual original mathematical result proven within the script that was published in academic mathematics discussions afterward. It's the only time in the history of television that a broadcast script proved an original mathematical theorem. But the one that I like best from The Simpsons, quieter than the Fermat gag, easier to miss, is Maggie's price in the original opening credits sequence. In the very first iteration of the famous opening, when the Simpson family converges in the living room, and Maggie passes through the supermarket checkout, the scanner reads a specific number, $847.63. That's not a random figure. The production team researched the average monthly cost of raising an infant in America in 1989 and found the number and put it in the scanner. Maggie's value, stated quietly in the background of a gag that moves too fast to read in real time, is a precise economic fact about the cost of the year the show launched. The price was later changed. The original is gone from syndicated and streaming versions. But it was there briefly in 1989. A piece of research embedded in a moment designed to be too fast to catch. These details don't make the show better, exactly. They don't change anything about what it is, but they do change how you think about who made it. People for whom this level of detail was not an extraordinary effort, but simply the natural register in which they operated. The jokes for the casual viewer and the jokes for the mathematician in the back of the room were the same jokes, running simultaneously. Professor Frink is worth a brief mention here because he's the show's most direct acknowledgement of the mathematical background of its writers. Frink, the anxious, incomprehensible scientist, voiced by Hank Azaria, speaks in a specific register of technical adjacent gibberish that sounds like physics until you listen too carefully, at which point some of it actually is physics. His name is a reference to John Frink, one of the show's real writers, which is a very specific kind of in-joke. A character named after a writer, written by people with the scientific background to make the character's technobabble occasionally accurate. Embedded in a show watched by millions of people who have no idea any of this is happening. There's a consistent philosophy underneath all of these details that I think is worth naming explicitly. The show was built by people who believe that making something layered, building jokes that work at multiple registers simultaneously, was not extra work. It was just the way good things were made. A joke that lands for a casual viewer and also lands differently for someone with specific knowledge is not a harder joke to write than a joke that only works one way. It's the same amount of work distributed across a broader surface. The Harvard pipeline produced writers who were constitutionally incapable of leaving a single register of a joke unfilled if another one was available. The mathematics in the backgrounds is the most visible evidence of that. But it runs through everything. The literary references, the film parodies, the political satire, the music choices, the specific absurdism of the show's best gags. All of it operates at more than one level at once. That's not an accident, it's a sensibility. The Harvard pipeline to The Simpsons is genuinely unusual as a cultural phenomenon, and it produced some downstream effects that are interesting to trace. Conan O'Brien wrote for the show in seasons 3 and 4, before Late Night, before The Tonight Show, before any of that. And the specific kind of comedy he developed there shaped his television work in ways he's described openly. David X. Cohen went from The Simpsons to Futurama, which he co-created with Groening, and which is in some ways even more mathematically dense than The Simpsons. Futurama regularly features topology jokes, physics references, and in the case of the Futurama theorem, an actually original piece of mathematical research proven within an episode script and later discussed in academic mathematics publications. Ken Keeler, who wrote that proof, has a Harvard doctorate in applied mathematics. He wrote a mathematical theorem into a half-hour animated comedy and had it published in a peer-reviewed context. The A113 detail, which I mentioned briefly, is worth a fuller description because it appears so widely across the show and connects to such a specific community of practice. Room A113 is a classroom at the California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, where a significant number of animators who went on to work in major studios received their training. The tradition of hiding A113 in animated works originated with CalArts graduates marking their work with a reference to the place where they learned their craft. It appears in The Simpsons in license plates, as part of building numbers, in prison IDs, in identification codes in various episodes. It appears in Pixar films, in other animated shows, in a wide range of productions that share the thread of CalArts training somewhere in their creative staff. It's the kind of detail that's invisible to most viewers and immediately legible to anyone who attended the institution or knows the tradition. A professional signal embedded in entertainment. There are versions of it in many creative industries. References that mean something specific to practitioners and nothing in particular to everyone else, sitting quietly in the work for the people who know to look. Since we're in the territory of things hidden specifically for people with particular knowledge, the Marge versus the Monorail episode, Season 4, which Conan O'Brien wrote, contains a quite precise parody of the Music Man structure. The episode's famous song, performed by a traveling salesman selling a monorail to Springfield, follows the specific rhythm and structure of Ya Got Trouble from the Music Man, essentially beat for beat. It's accurate enough that you'd need to know the Music Man reasonably well to fully appreciate it. Most viewers found it funny as a standalone piece. Viewers who knew the source material found it funny in a completely different way. Both experiences of the same episode were valid. Only one required additional information. This happened constantly in the classic era. The show layered jokes for multiple audiences in the same material, and the different audiences didn't need to know about each other. The yellow was the decision. That's the first thing to understand. The particular shade of bright canary yellow used for every human character in The Simpsons. Not skin-colored, not realistic, not naturalistic in any way. Was a deliberate choice made at the show's inception, and the reasoning behind it was almost entirely practical. Matt Groening has explained it in several interviews. On analog television, with viewers regularly flipping through channels on their remotes, you needed something that would register immediately on a screen seen from across a room. Most television content, even animation, operated in palettes of naturalistic or muted tones. A frame of yellow, bold, unnatural, immediately recognizable, would catch the eye during a channel flip in a way that nothing skin-toned would. You'd stop on it automatically even if you weren't looking for it, because your brain would register something unusual. It worked, obviously. The yellow is now so associated with the show that it's essentially a branding element. You could show someone a single yellow arm with 4 fingers and they'd know what they were looking at. The practical choice became the aesthetic identity. The 4-finger convention is worth a bit of extra context because The Simpsons didn't invent it. Animated characters have been drawn with 4 fingers for nearly a century, going back to Mickey Mouse in the late 1920s. The reason is partly aesthetic. 4 fingers are easier to animate than 5. And a 4-fingered hand reads cleanly at small sizes and low frame rates where 5 fingers would blur into an indistinct mass. And partly a comfortable convention that had simply become industry standard. When Groening designed The Simpsons characters, 4 fingers was the default assumption. The 5-finger exception for God and Jesus is therefore all the more deliberate precisely because it breaks a long-established norm. You have to specifically decide to give a character 5 fingers. Groening decided twice and for exactly the right characters. There's a second detail in the character design that lives alongside the yellow one, slightly more obscure. Look at Homer's face and profile. His hair, 3 spikes pointing upward and to the right, forms roughly the shape of the letter E-M. His ear, the round, simply drawn ear that's present on most Simpsons characters, forms the letter G. M.G. Matt Groening. Groening has confirmed this in interviews. He's described it as a way of putting his signature into the character design itself. His initials hidden in the face of the show's central figure, visible in every episode Homer has ever appeared in, to anyone who knows to look. The show even referenced it directly in a later episode, with a brief in-universe acknowledgement that Homer's profile contains Groening's initials. The ear itself, it's worth noting, is shared by most Simpsons characters. The specific G shape isn't unique to Homer. It's a standard design element of the show's character art, which means Groening's signature is technically present on almost every human face in Springfield. Not just Homer's, the whole town. Now the couch gags. Most people are aware that the couch gag changes with each episode. Fewer people have a clear sense of how comprehensively they change. Over 200 distinct couch gags across the show's run, ranging from the simple, the family arrives and sits as usual, to the elaborate, full short films, guest animated sequences, detailed parodies of other works. Banksy directed one, which aired in 2010 and depicted a grimly satirical version of the overseas animation process that makes the show possible. It's a full artistic statement delivered in a 2-minute couch gag. And the chalkboard gag, Bart's punishment writing in the opening, changes every episode too, and is often extremely specific to whatever was happening in the culture or in the show's own production at the time of writing. Some of them are simple jokes, some of them are responses to current events, some of them are so specific to a moment that they require context to understand now. Both of these elements, the couch gag and the chalkboard gag, are things most regular viewers register as the usual bit rather than examining individually. They're part of the rhythm of watching the show, noticed in aggregate rather than as specific objects. But they're actually a running record of where the show was at in any given week. What was on the writers' minds, what was funny in that specific moment, what detail someone wanted to plant in the 8 seconds of opening credits they had available. The chalkboard gag from the Season 4 premiere, Camp Krusty, which aired in September 1992, reads, "I will not fake my way through life." Bart Simpson in his punishment writing. On the chalkboard, "That is not an accident. The yellow skin caught your eye when you were flipping channels. The M and G were in Homer's face the whole time. The chalkboard was saying things if you read them. The couch was different every week if you paid attention. The show was always doing more than it looked like it was doing. That's just what it was. The opening sequence itself has more going on than most people have mapped. The full opening, or the famous one, not the shortened version that appears in later seasons when episode runtime gets tighter. It takes about 90 seconds and contains an enormous amount of information in rapid succession. The clouds parting to reveal The Simpsons in the title, the school, Bart and the chalkboard, the hallways of Springfield, other characters crossing the frame, the music building, Lisa biking past Homer's car, the family converging on the couch, usually with a gag at the end. Every element of this sequence changes potentially in any given episode. The chalkboard punishment is different. The couch gag is different. Sometimes the content of Bart's saxophone playing changes. Sometimes the background characters in various scenes are different. The opening is both a fixed ritual and a variable object. The structure is always the same, the specific contents are always potentially new. Across the full run, the opening has become a kind of compressed archive of the show's relationship with its own format. The Season 20 HD opening, which arrived in 2009 with the show's transition to high definition, is worth examining because it expanded the scope of what the opening contained. More of Springfield is shown, more characters appear. The sequence moved from a tight focus on the family to a broader canvas. Springfield as a town full of people, all of whom are going about their business as the Simpsons converge on their couch. The town feels larger, more inhabited, more real. It was a genuine creative expansion, not just a technical upgrade. And then there's the matter of how the show handled the animation transition itself. Seasons 1 through 13 were traditionally animated using hand-drawn cells. Actual drawings on paper, painted on transparent cells, photographed frame by frame. The process was expensive and time-consuming and produced a very specific visual quality. From Season 14 onward, the show moved to fully digital ink and paint. The characters look essentially the same. The design language was maintained carefully through the transition, but the production method changed completely. It's a seam that most viewers have never located, even when watching episodes from both sides of it in close succession. The production companies behind the animation also changed across the show's run, which is another layer of technical history that most viewers never encounter. Klasky Csupo, also known for Rugrats, handled the Tracy Ullman shorts and the first 3 seasons of the main series. Film Roman took over from Season 4 and held the role through Season 27. The in-house 20th television animation department has handled production from Season 28 onward. The actual drawing and rendering process moved through different studios in different cities, with overseas animation studios handling certain aspects of the process throughout. ACOM in South Korea being the primary overseas partner for the labor-intensive in-between animation for much of the run. Most viewers have no reason to know any of this, but the specific look of Season 2 is different from the specific look of Season 7, which is different again from Season 15, and the reasons for those differences are practical and institutional rather than aesthetic choices made by the creative team. One more design detail that sits comfortably in this section: the show's secondary characters, many of whom were designed as single-use background figures and then elevated by the writer's room noticing their potential. Mo Sislak was more fully developed in the first few seasons than later episodes sometimes reflect. There's a melancholy and a loneliness to early Mo that the character's later comic use sometimes flattens. Ned Flanders began as a broad joke about sanctimonious religiosity and became, across many seasons, one of the show's most genuinely affecting characters. A man managing grief, loneliness, and sincere faith in a world that finds him slightly ridiculous. The writers found the depth in the design, episode by episode over years. That's a different kind of hidden detail. Not an Easter egg, not a number in a piece of dialogue, but the same quality of attention applied to character work. Someone decided Ned deserved more than the joke he was built to deliver. Someone decided Mo's sadness was worth exploring. The show contains several characters who are funnier and more complete than their initial purpose required, because the people making it kept finding more in them. Phil Hartman joined The Simpsons as a recurring voice actor in Season 2 and stayed until Season 9. He was primarily known at the time for his work on Saturday Night Live, where he'd been a cast member from 1986 to 1994. 8 seasons, more than almost anyone else at the time. He was nicknamed The Glue on SNL, which describes exactly the quality he brought to everything he did. A steadying presence, technically flawless, genuinely generous with other performers. He left the show in 1994, and in 1995 he was cast as Bill McNeil on News Radio, the pompous, self-assured radio news anchor who was the center of an ensemble comedy on NBC. He received an Emmy nomination for the role. What's interesting is that his Simpsons work and his news radio work ran concurrently for 3 years, from 1995 until his death in 1998. During that period, he was playing, in parallel, Troy McClure's faded obliviousness and Bill McNeil's thriving obliviousness. 2 characters built from the same raw material, the same fundamental Hartman quality of playing total confidence in a character whose confidence is completely detached from any external justification. McNeil believed he was the most important person in the building. McClure believed his career was still ongoing. Neither belief was supportable. Both were performed with complete conviction. The same actor in 2 different registers of the same joke simultaneously. After his death, News Radio wrote Bill McNeil out by having him die off-screen of a heart attack, which was the only solution available to a live-action show that couldn't just retire the character from the narrative. John Lovitz was brought in for the 5th and final season. The show was canceled. It's the other version of The Absence. A space that someone tried to fill versus spaces The Simpsons chose to leave empty. Neither solution was right or wrong. They were just different responses to the same impossible situation. His 2 primary characters were Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. Troy McClure was a washed-up actor willing to appear in any film, commercial, or industrial video, identified by his opening line, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as," followed by a list of fictional titles that Hartman improvised variations on constantly. The line became one of the most quoted in the show's history. Lionel Hutz was an incompetent attorney who appeared in an improbable number of plots for a supporting character, and who Hartman played with the same committed straight-faced absurdity. Phil Hartman was murdered on May 28, 1998. He was 49. Both characters were retired after his death. Not written out, not explained, not killed in a special episode, not recast with a different voice. They simply stopped appearing. Troy McClure's last episode to air was the Season 9 finale in May 1998. Lionel Hutz appeared for the last time in a Season 9 episode recorded before Hartman's death. The show moved on without them, and the spaces they occupied were left empty. Groening has said that neither character could exist without Hartman's voice. The writing staff agreed. There was no discussion of recasting, no audition process, no attempt to find someone who could approximate what he did. The decision was made cleanly and maintained completely. In 35-plus years since his death, neither Troy McClure nor Lionel Hutz has appeared in a new Simpsons episode. Think about that for a moment. In a show that's run this long, a show that has never retired a plotline or a character type that still has comedic life in it, these two were simply allowed to be gone. Their absence is a permanent fixture of the show's later seasons. If you know they existed, you notice that they're missing, particularly in storylines that would naturally call for a Troy McClure type, or for a bumbling lawyer. The spaces are visible. Marcia Wallace, who voiced Edna Krabappel, died in October 2013. She was 70. The same decision was made. Krabappel, Mrs. K. Bart's long-suffering teacher, one of the show's richest supporting characters, was retired rather than recast. The episode that followed her death, 4 Regrettings and a Funeral in Season 25, included a brief moment where Bart writes on the chalkboard, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." Not in character, not a fictional tribute, a direct, real acknowledgement from the show's opening credits to its audience that someone was gone. These decisions don't get talked about enough, I think. The show has handled recasting in various ways over the decades. Dr. Hibbert was recast in 2021 as part of a production-wide decision that white actors would no longer voice non-white characters, which was a different kind of decision made thoughtfully for different reasons. The Hartman and Wallace situations were grief, handled with a specific kind of quiet dignity that the show doesn't always get credit for. Recasting would have been easier in purely practical terms. Hartman's characters were popular and useful, and they're still missed visibly in certain kinds of storylines. But the show decided that the absence was the right thing, and it's maintained that decision for over 2 decades. Troy McClure still has not appeared in a new episode. Lionel Hutz still has not appeared in a new episode. The spaces are still empty. Troy McClure's impact on the show was disproportionate to his technical status as a supporting character. He appeared in 27 episodes between seasons 2 and 9. His opening line, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as," was a format that Hartman and the writers found inexhaustibly generative. The fictional titles listed after that line accumulated into an absurdist filmography of a failed career. Dial M for Murderousness, Calling All Quakers, Alice Doesn't Live Anymore. The verdict was Mail Fraud, Preacher with 1,000 Faces. The joke worked every time because the titles were always precisely calibrated. Bad enough to be funny, specific enough to suggest an entire career arc, varied enough to feel genuinely inventive rather than repetitive. Hartman reportedly improvised variations on the formula constantly in the recording booth, riffing on the titles and delivery in ways that gave the writers material to work with. The show around him was scripted. His specific inhabitation of that script was something more fluid. He understood the joke precisely well enough to play inside it rather than just executing it. Lionel Hutz operated differently, less riff-based, more character work. Hutz is a joke about the legal system's most unfortunate fringe. The ambulance chaser, the ethically flexible attorney, the man who provides legal representation to people who can't afford better and delivers it worse than they expected. He's not malicious exactly, he's just catastrophically unsuited to his job and unwilling to admit it. Hartman played the character's oblivious confidence as genuine. Hutz believed in himself with a conviction entirely disconnected from any actual competence, which is funnier and stranger than playing him as a knowing fraud would have been. His law office is called I Can't Believe It's a Law Firm, which is a joke that rewards the exact right amount of attention. If you don't notice it, the scene still works. If you do notice it, it lands twice. Huts also has a business card that reads, Cases 1/lost/dismissed/overturned on technicality, 0/4/1/0. Another joke that's just sitting there in plain sight, visible for approximately 2 seconds, designed for the fraction of the audience that happens to read business cards in animated shows. These are the kinds of details that cost almost nothing to put in and reward a specific quality of viewer attention indefinitely. Hoots was full of them. Every episode he appeared in had at least one detail like that buried somewhere waiting. That's probably also why his absence is felt differently from Troy McClure's. McClure's loss is felt because the format was so good and Hartman inhabited it so completely. Hoots' loss is felt because the show was still building him, still finding new ways to use the character's specific failure mode, still hiding things in his props and signage and business dealings that a different kind of attention would keep finding years later. Both losses are real. They just feel different. There's something worth sitting with in the response to Hartman's death that I don't think gets said often enough. The Simpsons is a show that has at various points been casual about its own history. As we discussed with the Skinner situation, it has been willing to revise and reset when a good concept demanded it. That pragmatism didn't apply here. The show that occasionally walked away from 8 years of continuity for a clever idea would not walk away from Phil Hartman. The two things aren't contradictory. They describe the same show accurately. It just happens that the show knew, in this case, what was irreplaceable and what wasn't. There's something worth sitting with in that. A television show that has always found someone to play every role, always found a way to keep the machine running, deciding that some things don't get replaced. Some voices are what they are, and when they're gone, the role they played goes with them. The show carries those absences forward, episode after episode, season after season. A small, permanent acknowledgement that certain people can't be substituted for. The Simpsons has been on the air for 36 years. In that time, Bart Simpson has remained 10 years old. Lisa has remained 8. Maggie has not walked, spoken in anything other than a special episode context, or grown visibly in any direction. Homer still works at the same nuclear plant for the same employer. The family still lives at 742 Evergreen Terrace. Nobody in Springfield ages. The show decided this at the outset. The characters are fixed in time, permanent, unchanging, and it's maintained that commitment so completely and for so long that we've mostly stopped thinking about how strange it is. Bart will be 10 when the show ends, whenever that is. He'll have been 10 for decades by then, which means he'll have been 10 for longer than most of the people currently watching the show have been alive. This sounds like a simple creative choice. Keep the characters frozen, don't deal with the complications of aging. And it is partly, but the implications of that choice unfold in interesting ways over time, particularly around the question of backstory. In Season 2, we see Homer and Marge's courtship in the episode The Way We Was. They're teenagers in 1974. In Season 9, we see a flashback to Homer as a young man at Woodstock, which was 1969, which doesn't quite add up to the Season 2 timeline. By Season 19, Homer and Marge are teenagers in the 1990s because the show has updated their backstory to keep their ages roughly consistent with the present day. The specific decade of their youth has drifted forward by about 20 years since the show began. This is what's called the floating timeline. The show's past is allowed to move to keep the present consistent. It's a deliberate structural choice acknowledged by the writers, and it creates a quietly vertiginous effect for anyone watching older and newer episodes close together. The Homer and Marge of Season 2 have a different history to the Homer and Marge of Season 30. They're the same characters, but the era that made them is different. What makes this more interesting is that certain continuity is maintained across the full run. Maud Flanders died in Season 11. Ned has been a widower ever since. 30-odd seasons now of Ned without Maud. Edna Krabappel is gone and has stayed gone. Lisa decided to become a vegetarian in season 7. Lisa the vegetarian. And she has remained a vegetarian in every episode since. That last detail is partly a contractual one as it happens. Paul, he can see the world more clearly, understand things he couldn't before, and it makes him miserable. He has the crayon reinserted at his own request at the end of the episode and returns to his usual state. That's the show writing a formal explanation for something it had been doing informally for a decade. Homer getting progressively less bright across the seasons as the writing shifted. Rather than ignore the continuity question, someone wrote an episode that addressed it directly, gave it an in-world cause, and then restored the status quo. Codified the stupidity in canon. Filed the paperwork, as it were. The floating timeline also interacts strangely with the show's use of real history. Events that were satirical commentary in the late 1980s or early 1990s, Reagan-era politics, specific cultural phenomena, particular anxieties, are still present in some episodes, while later seasons reflect entirely different eras. Watching the show across its full run is like moving through time horizontally rather than vertically. You're not seeing the characters age through history. You're seeing history move through characters who remain unchanged. There's something dreamlike about that, honestly. Springfield exists outside of time in a very specific way. The town has absorbed 36 years of history without quite inhabiting any of them permanently. It contains the 1990s and the 2000s and the 2010s and the 2020s simultaneously, jumbled into a single present tense where Bart is still 10 and the nuclear plant is still running and Homer is still coming home from work and nothing has permanently ended except the things that were taken away. Maude, Edna, Mrs. K, certain voices, which remain ended. That combination, nothing ages, but loss persists, is a strange one. It's essentially the emotional architecture of nostalgia, built into the formal structure of a television show. The things that were good are preserved forever. The losses are permanent. Everything else just floats. Maude Flanders' death in season 11 is the clearest example of a permanent loss and the most consequential continuity decision the show ever made. She was killed, hit by t-shirt cannons fired from a racetrack, which is the exact kind of absurdist Simpsons death. In the episode Alone Again Naturadiddly in February 2000. The actual reason for her removal from the show was a contract dispute. Maggie Roswell, who voiced Maude, was unwilling to continue flying to Los Angeles for recording sessions and had asked to record from her home in Denver. The production refused. She left, and rather than recast Maude, the writers killed her. The detail that matters here is what they built on top of it. Maude's death became one of the most meaningful, ongoing threads in the show's later run. Ned Flanders, the devoutly religious, relentlessly cheerful neighbor, became, after her death, a character carrying grief. His attempts to date again across several subsequent seasons are among the most humanely observed storylines in the show's post-classic era. The writers took a pragmatic production decision and turned it into genuine emotional material that has continued for over 2 decades. The loss is real within the fiction because the show committed to it as real. That's the continuity that matters. Not the dates of Homer and Marge's courtship, not which decade Bart was born in. Those things float because they're circumstantial. What stays permanent is what the characters have experienced. Loss stays. Growth stays occasionally. The things that cost something tend to persist. The McCartney condition is one of those details that I think people know about but don't always appreciate as fully as they might. Paul and Linda McCartney guest starred in season 7, episode 5, Lisa the Vegetarian in 1995. Their condition for appearing, the thing they made the show agree to in writing, was that Lisa would remain vegetarian in all future episodes. The show accepted that condition. 30 years later, Lisa is still vegetarian. In every episode since 1995 in which Lisa's dietary choices have come up, she has not eaten meat. An agreement made with the musician in 1995 has been binding on a television show through dozens of showrunner changes, hundreds of writers, complete shifts in the production infrastructure. It's honored without exception. That's an unusual kind of institutional memory. Television shows don't typically have written commitments to specific character traits that outlast the people who made them. The show's continuity department across 3 decades has maintained Lisa's vegetarianism as a hard constraint in every script it's evaluated. It's become infrastructure, a rule that's been in place long enough that many of the people maintaining it weren't there when it was made. The broader question of what continuity The Simpsons does and doesn't maintain is genuinely interesting to map. Some things are permanent. Ned's widowhood, the Apu marriage and children, Milhouse's parents' divorce, major character decisions like Lisa's vegetarianism and her Buddhism. Character deaths written as permanent have stayed permanent. But ages never change. The specific decade of characters' backstories drifts forward with the years. Homer's many side jobs reset each week, and most of the town's status after any given catastrophe is restored without comment. The distinction between what persists and what resets tells you something real about what the show considers essential versus incidental. The secondary characters are interesting from a continuity standpoint because the show maintains their consistent traits even when it resets their circumstances. Chief Wiggum is always incompetent. Apu is always hardworking and slightly put upon by his circumstances. Comic book guy is always pedantic and self-satisfied. These character traits persist across every episode they appear in, regardless of what has happened to them in previous episodes. It's a different kind of continuity, not plot continuity, but character continuity, the sense that these people are reliably themselves in the ways that matter. The show has maintained that for secondary characters across 35 plus years, even as it frequently resets what happens to them. You always know who they are. You don't always know what they've been through lately. The jobs are worth a special mention because Homer's employment history has become its own kind of running joke about the show's relationship with episodic television. By some counts, Homer has held over 200 different jobs across the show's run. Astronaut, monorail conductor, food critic, mayor's aide, mob enforcer, country music manager, police officer, safety inspector, his actual job, though he's bad at it. The show gives him a new occupation in an episode and then resets him to the nuclear plant for the next one. It's a purely episodic approach to character circumstance. The job is useful for this story. Afterward, it doesn't persist. The audience accepts this because the character persists. Homer is always Homer, whatever he happens to be doing this week. And there's something almost philosophical about that when you sit with it long enough. The show is suggesting at a structural level that identity is more stable than circumstance, that the person you are doesn't change based on what you're doing. Homer is Homer as an astronaut, and Homer as a mob enforcer, and Homer as a nuclear safety inspector. The job is incidental, the man is permanent. The show's self-awareness about its own length and its own patterns is another thread worth pulling at. The Simpsons has been running long enough that it has had to confront, in real time, the question of what it means to keep going. There are episodes from the mid-run onward that are explicitly about the question of identity and change. Characters wondering who they are after years of accumulated events, or storylines that acknowledge how much time has technically passed without the characters having aged through it. The show sometimes breaks its own fourth wall around this question, commenting on its own continuity and duration with a kind of wry self-awareness that the early seasons didn't need to deploy. Bart gets famous. Season 5, Episode 12 is an interesting example. The episode where Bart briefly becomes famous for accidentally saying, "I didn't do it," on live television. The episode is partly a commentary on catchphrase culture and the specific way cartoons generate and exploit signature lines. Bart's accidental catchphrase spreads across merchandise and public consciousness. He gets tired of it, and then it fades. The episode is self-aware enough to acknowledge the show's own relationship with catchphrases. "Doe, eat my shorts. Don't have a cow." and the mechanics by which popular culture absorbs and depletes those phrases. It's the show thinking about itself. The show has also developed an interesting relationship with its own reputation over the decades. The phrase, "The Simpsons did it," originating from South Park, where it became a running joke about the show having already covered every possible premise, is now used colloquially to describe the general phenomenon of discovering that The Simpsons anticipated something. The show has run long enough and covered enough territory that the overlap between its fictional world and real events has become statistically significant. The Simpsons did it is both a joke and a real observation, and the show exists in the space between those two things. The episodes from season 33 onward, under Matt Selman as primary showrunner, have received notably more favorable responses than much of the middle period of the show's run. Critics and longtime fans have described a creative renaissance of sorts. Format-breaking episodes, more ambitious structural experiments, a willingness to be emotionally serious in ways that the Scully-era episodes sometimes avoided. Whether this represents a genuine return to form or a recalibration of expectations is a debate worth having, but a show in its fourth decade still managing to surprise people is something worth acknowledging. That's not nothing. The Simpsons has become famous over the past decade or so for a phenomenon that gets called Simpsons predictions, a joke from 2000 that seemed to anticipate Donald Trump's presidency, a gag from 1998 that showed Fox as a division of Walt Disney Company, 20 years before that became real, a sequence from the late 1990s with technology that resembled a smartwatch, references to things that hadn't happened yet that eventually happened, attributed to the show's apparent ability to see the future. This reputation is real enough that it spawned its own media coverage, its own YouTube compilations, its own cultural mythology. When something unusual occurs in public life, there's a reliable wave of people searching The Simpsons archive to see if the show got there first. The more interesting story is why it keeps happening and what it actually reveals about the people who wrote the show. Take the Trump presidency prediction first, because it's the most discussed. The episode is Season 11, Episode 17, Bart to the Future, which aired in March 2000. In the episode, a future version of Lisa Simpson is president, and she mentions inheriting a budget deficit from her predecessor, President Trump. The writer of the episode, Dan Graney, has explained publicly what the joke was meant to be. Trump had briefly flirted with a presidential run in 1999 and 2000 before withdrawing. The joke wasn't a prediction of the future, it was a joke about the most absurd possible thing that could happen in politics. A flashy real estate developer and reality television personality somehow becoming president, chosen specifically because it seemed too ridiculous to be real. The joke landed because it was obviously impossible. The prediction was discovered later, in 2016, because the impossible thing happened. The Disney prediction follows similar logic. The episode, When You Dish Upon a Star, Season 10, Episode 5 from 1998, shows a 20th century Fox building with a placard reading, "A division of Walt Disney Company." At the time, it was a satirical comment on media consolidation, a joke about the direction corporate entertainment was heading, extrapolated from trends that were already visible. The consolidation of major studios, the expansion of media conglomerates, the absorption of independent brands into large corporate families, all of these were observable tendencies in the late 1990s entertainment industry. A writing room full of people who paid close attention to that industry followed the observable trend to its logical conclusion. The deal that made it real closed in 2019. This is the explanation that makes the most sense across most of the predictions. And it's less mystical, but more interesting than the alternative. The Simpsons writing room in its peak years was staffed by people with graduate-level educations in mathematics, physics, and computer science, who were also deeply attentive observers of American culture, economics, politics, and technology. When they made a satirical joke about the future, they were often following a real trend to its logical conclusion. And the trends they identified were real trends that eventually, in time, reached their conclusions. The Higgs boson case is the one that genuinely puzzles me, though. In Season 10, The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace, the same episode with Homer's Fermat approximation, which we talked about earlier, Homer's blackboard contains an equation that a physicist named Simon Singh later identified as predicting the mass of the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson wasn't experimentally confirmed until 2013, 15 years after the episode aired. Singh examined the equation and found that it pointed to a value consistent with the eventual confirmed mass. David X. Cohen, who wrote the mathematical content for that episode, has said he was drawing on particle physics research that was current in 1998. The mass value being approximated was apparently in circulation in theoretical physics at the time, just not yet confirmed experimentally. So it's not entirely magic, but it's also not entirely mundane. A cartoon blackboard gag from 1998, extrapolated from cutting-edge theoretical physics of the time, approximated a value that wouldn't be confirmed for another 15 years. That's a specific kind of precision that's difficult to simply explain away. The broader thing is this: the show was written by people who were paying very close attention to the world, to its systems, its tendencies, its apparent trajectories. They were making jokes about where things were heading because they could see where things were heading. Satire at its most useful isn't prophecy. It's observation followed carefully to its conclusions. When a Simpsons prediction turns out to be real, what you're usually looking at is a joke that was too accurate, arriving in a world that eventually became the joke's setup. The absurdity was always real. The show just said it out loud before anyone else was ready to. That's not seeing the future, it's seeing the present more clearly than most. There are a few more predictions worth naming just to give the breadth of it. The show depicted a Nobel Prize winner in economics in a 2010 episode, a character named Bengt Holmström, who then won the actual Nobel Prize in economics in 2016. The show depicted smartwatch-like technology in 1995, in an episode set in 2010. A 1998 episode correctly anticipated the structure of a US-Sweden curling match outcome at a subsequent Winter Olympics. A 2014 episode in which a lion escapes the zoo was followed by an actual lion escaping a zoo in similar circumstances. The cumulative effect of these is to create a perception of the show as genuinely prophetic, and I think that perception, while understandable, mislocates where the ability actually lives. The Simpsons writing room didn't see the future. It produced an enormous amount of content over an enormous span of time, staffed by people with the analytical ability to identify tendencies and follow them. Given enough output and enough precision in observation, some portion of that output will coincide with reality. The question isn't whether some Simpsons jokes will turn out to describe real events. At this volume, some inevitably will. The question is how many and how accurate, and the answer to that is higher than coincidence alone explains. The show also has a particular relationship with celebrity that enabled a different kind of near-future accuracy. From very early on, The Simpsons had access to major celebrities who would guest star as themselves, and in doing so would sometimes reveal aspects of their public persona or professional circumstances that later became news. An episode where a celebrity's career struggles or personal life is depicted in satirical form, written when those things were visible but not yet widely reported, can look like prediction when the real events materialize. But it's really just privileged knowledge arriving before its public confirmation. The one consistent through line across all of this is observation. The writing room noticed something real, followed it honestly where it led, and the satire turned out to be accurate because the thing it noticed was real and heading somewhere identifiable. That's the simpler version of the prediction story, and I think it's also the more interesting one. The show didn't see the future. It just saw the present clearly enough that the future, when it arrived, looked familiar. The show has become self-aware about its reputation for this. There have been multiple episodes in the modern run that directly address the Simpsons predicted it phenomenon. Episodes that acknowledge the cultural mythology that's built up around the show's apparent foresight, usually through jokes at the mythology's expense. A character in a recent episode comments that the show has predicted so many things it started to feel like a responsibility. The writers know what the discourse is. They've been inside it long enough to find it funny. When a show has been running for 36 seasons, part of its subject matter eventually becomes its own history, including the history of how people have interpreted it. There's one more thing about this I keep turning over. Watching an episode from 1994 and 2025 is a specific experience. You're watching people notice things about their present moment that we can now see were accurate observations about tendencies that continued. The jokes about corporate consolidation, about politicians and their presentations of themselves, about class aspiration and its limits. They land differently 30 years on, not because the show was prophetic, because the things it noticed were real. And real things persist. Before The Simpsons was The Simpsons, it was something stranger, a set of animated shorts, 48 of them in total, broadcast between April 1987 and May 1989 as part of the Tracy Ullman Show on Fox. The Ullman Show was a sketch comedy program, and the Simpsons segments were filler between sketches. Typically about a minute long, sometimes less, simple and direct in a way that makes them feel almost alien compared to the show they became. The animation style in the Ullman shorts is noticeably rougher than the series that followed. The characters look slightly different, more exaggerated, less refined, with a visual quality that reflects the production budget and timeline of a filler segment in a variety show rather than a dedicated animated series. Homer is fatter, more circular. Bart's design is less settled. The family's proportions are more extreme. They look like what they are. Characters still being figured out, not yet the definitive designs that would be reprinted on millions of t-shirts. The stories in the shorts are also different in character. They're intimate, quiet, domestic, a short about the kids not wanting to go to bed, a short about Homer and Marge getting a few minutes to themselves, a short about Bart and Lisa fighting over something small. The scale is very small, which is partly a production constraint and partly a register that the full series rarely revisits. The Ullman shorts are The Simpsons at their most ordinary, genuinely human in a way that preceded the show's ambition to be everything else simultaneously. Groening has spoken about the Ullman shorts with a mixture of pride and wry distance. They were made under constraints that required speed and simplicity, and the speed and simplicity produced something genuinely affecting in its smallness. There's a short called Good Night, the very first one from April 1987, in which Homer and Marge say goodnight to each of the children one by one, visiting each bedroom. That's the whole short. 3 bedrooms, 3 children, a parent saying goodnight. It's not a joke. It's just a family moment, rendered simply, and it works because the warmth in it is real even in this rough, early form. The decision to spin the characters out of the Ullman Show into their own half-hour series came after Fox saw the shorts generating a response larger than the sketch material around them. Viewers were responding to these 1-minute animated segments more distinctly than to the broader show hosting them, which is a fairly clear signal that something is working. The Tracy Ullman Show itself is an interesting context for all of this. Ullman was a genuine all-around performer, singer, comedian, impressionist, and the show was ambitious for network television in 1987, a variety format that attracted a quality of writing and performance that most sketch shows didn't reach. The Simpsons segment sat within that context and drew on it. The show's early sensibility, its interest in ordinary domestic life, its attention to class and aspiration and the specific texture of working American families, was not a departure from what Ullman's show was doing. It was a continuation of it translated into animation. One consequence of the show's stratospheric success in the early 1990s that sometimes gets overlooked in historical accounts is the speed at which the merchandising universe exploded. By 1990, barely a year into the main series, Bartmania had produced an extraordinary wave of licensed products. T-shirts, posters, action figures, bed sheets, lunchboxes, video games, coloring books. The Underachiever and Proud of It t-shirt became one of the fastest-selling items of merchandising in television history. Schools banned Bart Simpson t-shirts. The moral panic around Bart was real and brief, and in retrospect, very funny. He was the most transgressive character American television could apparently produce in 1990. And what he was being transgressive about was doing badly in school and talking back to his parents. It says something specific about that cultural moment that this felt dangerous. Now talking about the guest stars. The Simpsons holds a Guinness World Record for the most guest stars in television history. 810, certified as of April 2020. This is not close. No other show has come within a meaningful distance of that number. The show has featured musicians, athletes, politicians, scientists, film directors, other television stars, animated characters from other shows, real animals, and in at least one case, a sitting president of the United States as themselves. The breadth of the guest star list is itself a kind of historical document, a record of who was culturally relevant in any given season, who was willing to appear in a cartoon, and what the show's cultural reach was at different points in its run. The philosophy around guest stars shifted over the show's run. In the classic era, guests were typically integrated into stories in ways that used their public persona as material. The comedy arrived from the collision between who the guest was and what Springfield required of them. Baseball legends in Homer at the Bat, Season 3, each one given a specific comedic fate perfectly calibrated to their public image. Darryl Strawberry as the earnest overachiever, Wade Boggs in a pub dispute, Roger Clemens turning into a chicken. The guest isn't just present, the guest is the joke, and the joke is built from specific knowledge of who the guest is. In later seasons, guests were sometimes just present, appearing as themselves without the same degree of engagement from the writing. The show's status had become large enough that the celebrity appeared partly because it was The Simpsons, rather than because a specific story demanded them. Both modes are real, and both are visible across the run. The most famous hidden guest star in the show's history is Michael Jackson. Season 3, Episode 1, Stark Raving Dad, aired on September 19, 1991. In the episode, Homer is committed to a mental institution and encounters a large white man who claims to be Michael Jackson, though the man claims his name is Leon Kompowski. The character is voiced by someone credited as John J. Smith. The voice sounds unmistakably like Michael Jackson. He sings a birthday song for Lisa. The performance is warm, funny, and genuinely affecting. John J. Smith was Michael Jackson. This was not a secret kept from the production. It was a secret maintained by the production at Jackson's specific request. He wanted to appear on the show without announcing it, without the publicity machinery that accompanied everything he did in that period of his career. So he provided the voice, requested an alias in the credits, and the show obliged. The alias stood for nearly a decade before it became common knowledge. The episode aired to millions of viewers with Michael Jackson's voice coming out of a fictional character, uncredited, for reasons the audience would only learn about much later. There's a small additional detail to this story. The speaking voice in the episode is Michael Jackson's own voice. The singing, however, the birthday song near the episode's end, was performed by a sound-alike named Kip Lennon, because Jackson's record contract at the time prevented him from recording vocals for other projects without specific permissions. So the episode contains Jackson's speaking voice and someone else's singing voice, both attributed to the same fictional character under the same alias. The episode was later pulled from streaming services by Jackson's estate in 2019 in the aftermath of the documentary Leaving Neverland. It remains one of the show's most watched and most discussed early episodes, now complicated by what came after it in a way that its production couldn't have anticipated. The episode itself is genuinely good, one of the better Season 3 episodes. Warm and character-driven, built around Lisa's birthday being forgotten, and the unexpected person who helps repair it. The circumstances around it are more complicated. That's a tension the show has had to live with, and does. The guest star list taken as a whole is also a record of the show's cultural position across its run. The classic era guests, the baseball players, the actors, the musicians who were genuinely at peak relevance, reflect a show that was the most important thing on television for a period in the early 1990s. Everyone wanted to be on it because being on it was a meaningful cultural moment. That changed gradually as the show aged and the landscape changed around it. The guests in later seasons are often still significant, but the specific quality of centrality that characterized the early years is different now. The show is an institution rather than a phenomenon. Institutions get different kinds of guests than phenomena do. 810 confirmed guests over 36 years works out to roughly 22 or 23 guest stars per season on average, which is one every 2 or 3 episodes, which is actually quite a lot for a scripted show. The Simpsons has maintained that density of outside creative engagement across the entire run, across complete changes in the cultural landscape around it, without it becoming routine in the way that saturation usually makes things. Some of those guests are completely forgotten now. Some of them are the reason certain episodes are remembered at all. The guest star infrastructure of the show is also worth a moment, because getting 810 people to appear in a cartoon is not a passive thing that happens by itself. It requires a production culture that actively pursues guests, that makes the experience of appearing worthwhile, and that has a strong enough institutional reputation to attract people who might not otherwise do it. Part of that reputation was built on how the show actually used its guests, particularly in the classic era, where appearing meant being part of a genuinely funny piece of television rather than just lending your name to a promotional moment. The Simpsons also gave certain guests something they couldn't get elsewhere: the ability to comment on themselves through a fictional filter. A celebrity playing a heightened version of their public persona in Springfield could make jokes about themselves that would be uncomfortable or impossible in any other format. The distance of animation, the absurdism of the setting, gave the gags permission that a real interview or a live appearance couldn't have. Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger playing exaggerated celebrity versions of themselves in Season 10. Michael Buffer, Stephen Hawking, who appeared multiple times and who the show consistently depicted with a combination of reverence and affectionate absurdism. Leonard Nimoy. Elizabeth Taylor, who provided the single line of dialogue Maggie has ever spoken in the main continuity. Daddy, in the Season 4 premiere, A Streetcar Named Marge. Taylor didn't receive a billing credit. It was a gift to the show. The breadth of this list, 810 people across 36 years in fields from sport to science to music to politics, is itself a kind of record of who The Simpsons was allowed to be in conversation with across its run. That's a significant thing for an animated comedy to have accumulated. Not just the records, not just the episodes, but the ongoing demonstration that the show was considered serious enough and fun enough and culturally central enough that the world kept agreeing to show up. We could keep going. There's always more. The Tracy Ullman shorts, which we touched on briefly, have a whole documentary's worth of context that we barely scratched. The production history of the movie, which took 4 years, involved 11 credited writers and was for a long time considered genuinely impossible to do well, deserves its own long sit. The specific pipeline the show created for American comedy writers over 30 years. A disproportionate number of people who shaped the television landscape of the last 3 decades passed through that writer's room, or were shaped by people who did. Conan O'Brien's late-night voice is partly The Simpsons. Tina Fey's writer's room instincts were formed partly in conversation with what The Simpsons was doing. The show's influence on comedy writing is almost impossible to fully trace because it's so pervasive. There are whole threads we've only pulled at slightly, the mathematics embedded in backgrounds, the character designs that hold more information than they advertise, the quiet institutional decisions about grief and absence, the empty chairs, the retired characters, the spaces maintained carefully. That the show made without announcement and has kept for decades. What I keep returning to after all of it is how much of this work was done without expectation of notice. Swartzwelder's episodes, written in a booth in his living room and sent in without attendance. The mathematical content and backgrounds that only people with specific training would ever catch. The Valjean number planted 4 years before the story it belonged to. The McBain film distributed across 4 seasons without announcement. The careful maintenance of characters who are no longer there continued episode after episode because it was the right thing to do rather than because anyone was checking. Nobody required that level of care. The show would have been successful with less of it. The audience wouldn't have known the difference. And yet here it is, in episode after episode, small decision after small decision, an enormous accumulated weight of attention that most people will never consciously notice, but that shapes, invisibly, the way the show feels. The thing people respond to when they say the classic era had something the later era doesn't have isn't always identifiable as a specific choice. It's the aggregate quality of hundreds of those small, invisible decisions, made by people who cared more than the job technically required. And there's something worth saying about what it feels like to discover these things, which is different from just knowing them. Finding the McBain film for the first time, assembling the clips, watching the narrative click into place, is a specific kind of pleasure. It's not just the discovery itself, it's the retroactive recontextualization of something you've already experienced. You watch those clips as jokes, as background filler, as animated cutaways in episodes about something else entirely. And then you discover they were part of something deliberate, and every previous viewing changes slightly in retrospect. The clips you watched passively become a film you were shown without being told you were being shown a film. That's a specific kind of trust the show extends to its audience. Not the trust that you'll catch every detail. Most people won't. Most details are missed. But the trust that if you do catch them, they'll be worth catching. Nothing was put there carelessly. Everything that's hidden has been hidden intentionally, maintained consistently, and would reward the attention you give it. That's a promise the show makes implicitly through the sheer volume of it. And it's a promise the show has kept for 36 years. The show was built by people who were paying close attention the whole time. And I think that's why we still come back to it. Not just nostalgia, though there's plenty of that, but because somewhere in the texture of even the most ordinary episode, even the most unremarkable plot, there's the faint signal of genuine care. Someone considered this. Someone thought it was worth getting right. Someone hit a number and a line of dialogue 4 years before it was needed. Someone put a complete film in 5 scattered cutaway gags. Someone wrote a mathematical theorem into a chalkboard background and didn't mention it. And at some point, without planning to, most of us who grew up with this show built a relationship with Springfield that goes beyond the show itself. The couch, the house, Homer coming home from work. These aren't just settings, they're reference points. The way certain music becomes associated with specific years of your life. Certain episodes of The Simpsons are associated with specific evenings, specific rooms, specific ages you were when you watched them. The show is long enough now that it spans most of a human life for anyone who was there at the beginning. People who watched the first episode as small children have children of their own who have now watched the show too. That's a strange kind of continuity. Not the show's continuity, but the continuity of the people watching it, measured in decades against a set of characters who never change. Springfield stays the same. The people watching it don't. And maybe that's partly why we come back. 36 seasons, over 700 episodes, the same house on Evergreen Terrace, the same family on the couch. And the theme, written in a car, on the drive home from a single meeting in 1989 by someone who apparently just knew what it should sound like, playing at the start of all of it, unchanged, exactly as it was. There's more of this probably in a future video. There's always more. The show is a very large place, and most of it is still waiting. The hidden film that nobody caught for 20 years. The number in the dialogue that pointed 4 years forward. The initials in the face that's been on television since before most of its current viewers were born. All of it sitting there, patient, in the same house, on the same street, in a town with no fixed location that feels somehow more like home than anywhere that can be found on a map. For now, good night. And if you're still awake, you've probably been watching too much Simpsons, which, all things considered, is a reasonable way to spend your time.